All right. Hi. I was trying to live stream on the other one, but I was not able to do it. So I started a new one. Um, Let me try to get the link for this one and send it to the people in the chat. Um, this is what I get for trying to try out a new technology without testing it. All right, let me go ahead and try to get the link and sending the link to the other one that was supposed to have people watching. And I'll just hang out here for a second and see how it goes. All right. Thanks, Jack. Hi. Sorry, I'm terrible at live streaming. I will get better. All right. So let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay. So I was coding for 15 minutes just by myself. So thank you all for telling me that I was not. And I am going to go ahead and reset all of my work. I'm just going to delete this file. All right. I'm going to just try to get it a little bit reversed and then we'll get started. Okay. Now I can share. All right. Share my entire. All right. Can everybody see VS Code and book crud? Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Okay. So this is as far as I got. I'll just kind of walk you through it because it's just the setup of the testing anyway. So it's like not super exciting. But basically, this is kind of where you can start in all of your tests. So what is our goal today? Our goal is to test all of the CRUD routes in our book application in our service file. Okay, so this is unit testing. The idea is that you want to test as small as possible of a unit in order to see if your code is working. But the idea is that if you test all of the units separately and you add them all up, then your whole application is tested. You'll also add like end-to-end testing, maybe some manual testing too. You could do like deploy your application and then have like fake users test it and stuff like that too. So there's lots of different ways to test your application. We're just going to look at unit testing today, specifically in a service. Okay. So NestJS uses Jest under the hood. So you just create a describe. So describe is going to be like a series of tests. So we're describing the app service, okay, which is this guy. All right. And then we're going to make our tests, each one of them. Okay. Here we're defining the service that we're testing, and we're saying it's going to be of our class app service. All right. And then we're saying, hey, before each of our tests, what we want to do is we want to create a testing module. We want to provide that testing module our app service, and we want to get it all set up. Okay. This is going to be pretty similar every time you do it. Okay. Then what I went to do is I went to the package JSON to look at what the test command is. So in order to run a test, you can use one of two commands. You can either say npm run test, which will just run any file, any tests with any files that end in .spec.ts. Okay. So all you have to do is make sure that when you add a test, you name it, whatever you need to name it, and then spec.ts, and this test and test watch will run it. All right. You can use npm run test, and that will just run all of the tests and all of the spec files. Okay. What's even better, though, is to run npm test, run test, watch. And can anyone in the chat tell me what they think the watch part does? Well, if you were thinking that the watch part watches your changes in your code and reruns the test anytime you change a piece of code that could affect that test, you would be correct. Okay, so this is just going to watch our code. So if I go and I change something in my app service and I say like console.log potato, okay, it's going to be like, oh, wait, I was testing, thanks, Jack. I was testing the app service and app service just changed. Okay, so this can be a great way that if you are working on a new feature or you're debugging or something like that, you can keep this open and you can kind of just go through and watch it and see like, oh, I just messed this up. And you can see exactly when in your code you mess things up. Okay. All right, so we are failing the test. Let's let our error messages guide us. We are failing this test because we must have at least one test and we don't have any. So let's write a test, okay? And that's what this is complaining about up here too. It's saying, hey, you created this service, but then you didn't use it. So we are going to create the first test that I always create, which is that the service should be defined, okay? So the it part is going to be like the test, all right? Everything that's within that function is going to be your test. It's going to run this function here, and then it's going to evaluate whether or not the statements within that function are true. If they're all true, then that test passes. If any of them are false, then that test fails. And then you'll get like an error message or an explanation of why out of it. Okay. The part that you write here in quotes is going to be the description of your test. So I like to really keep it specific to like, what should this test be doing? If it's doing too many things, you might want to write another test. Okay. So here we're saying that it, meaning our service, should be defined. All right. So then in it, we're writing our test cases, right? Our statements that we expect to be true. So we expect service to be defined. We want this to be true in order for the test to pass. We are getting a false. So let's let our error messages guide our decisions. Nest can't resolve dependencies of app service. Please make sure that the argument book repository at index 0 is available in the test root module. So this gives us quite a big hints. All right. So basically, if we go over to our app service, you can see that when we construct our service, we are injecting our book repository, essentially the repository that allows us to interact with our database. All right. So in order to create a service, an app service in our test, we also need to make sure that we're injecting our book repository. All right. In the chat, please tell me, how are we injecting the real book repository? Why or why not into our test service? I'll give a second to respond. All right. If you were thinking, no, we're not going to do the real one, we're going to mock it, then you would have been right. Okay. Why would we mock the database in here, the repository that allows us to interact with our database? Well, because we're unit testing. We want to test the smallest piece of code that we can test, and we want to test specifically what code we've written. Type ORM wrote the find method, okay? Type ORM is a highly tested piece of software. I don't need to test type ORM. They test type ORM. All I'm testing is that my code calls the book repository find method and what it calls it with, okay? And maybe that it returns whatever the book repository returns, okay? So Jack says, I guess you wouldn't want to mess with the actual database and fill. Yeah, you don't. And also it just adds like extra dependencies, right? So you're adding complexity. So then your tests could fail because connection with your database isn't correct. Whereas like you don't actually want to test your connection with your database here. You want to test that your service functions, your service methods are behaving appropriately. Okay. So this is where we want to mock. All right. So we are going to create a mock book repository. So we're going to say mock book repository. All right. And that is just going to be an object. And then in our object, it's going to have the methods that we're going to call. All right. I'm just going to start with find because that's the one that we use here. All right. To show you all how this works. And then I'm just going to say just.fn like this. Okay. So what are we saying here? We're saying that we are defining this mock book repository, all right? And this mock book repository has a method in it called find. And that is just going to be a just function, okay? It's just going to be a mock function. We could create the mock return value and the implementation of what it does here, but we don't need to worry about that because we're going to do that in the individual test. That gives us a little bit more flexibility, okay? You can still see that we're getting things wrong here and it's still upset because we didn't set up our testing module correctly by adding our book repository to it. So the way that we would do that is we would add it to our providers array. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more readable. And then we will comment down and yep. We want to provide book repository, but instead of using the real value, we're going to use our mock book repository. So now what we should see is we run our test and hopefully we should see it passes, right? Our app service tests have been run and we can see that app service should be defined and it is. And we are using our mock book repository. That's what's getting injected into our app service instead of the real repository. So yay. Are there any questions about the setup of our spec test? If so, add it to the chat and I'll answer it, but I'm going to move on. Okay. So I want to write another test. So now the test that I want to write for is I want to work on this get books test. All right. So I'm going to go back to my service file and I'm going to start a new test. Okay. And you can see that Copilot is very eager to write. I would say that when you are writing this yourself for the first time, that you should try to not let Copilot write it. Make sure you understand what you're trying to write before letting them. So, and you want to find like the best way that you understand your test too, because ultimately these tests are going to be for you when you change code one day and you push it and then your test fails. You want to be able to understand past you and be like, oh, it failed because of this. And this is what this test was looking for. And this is why it failed. This is what I need to fix. Okay. So we want to say it should. So like, yes, should it return an array of books? Yes. But what I want to say, what I want it to do is I want it to call the book repository's find method. All right. So I'm going to say it should call the book repository's find method and return the results. Okay. So that's telling me exactly what I want the get books function to do. All right. And that's exactly what then I'm going to write my tests for. Okay. All right. So when you write a test, the first thing that you're going to look at is you want to like set up the test. Okay. So that's typically going to be like your inputs and your outputs, and then anything that needs to be mocked on the inside. And if that doesn't make sense yet, that's fine. We're going to get to it. Okay. So for inputs, we're not inputting anything into this method, so we don't have to worry about that. For outputs, you basically want to like mock what is going to come out. Okay. I don't actually care what comes out because all I'm testing is that this method calls the book repository's find method and returns whatever that method finds. Okay. So it should result with the books, right? So we can say const result is equal to, yes, could I add some fake books in there? Sure. But do I need to? No, because it doesn't actually matter, right? Let's add one though, just for readability's sake. Okay, so sure, we can say ID1 title test book. Okay, That's the result that we want to happen when we call this method, okay? The next thing that we're going to do, Copilot is correct, is that we want to, right here, we're just saying that find is a function, but we're not saying what this function does. In our individual tests, we can actually say like, okay, here what I want to happen is I want this mock book repository find method. I want it to mock a return value, okay? I want that when I call the find method, I want it to return this result here. Okay, because again, we're not testing that TypeORM works properly. We don't care what TypeORM does. We just are saying that, like, pretend we use TypeORM and have it send us back this result. All right, cool. Next, then, once you have your inputs and your outputs and you have everything mocked correctly, then you can actually call the method that you're trying to test. So what we can do now, and it's trying to be clever by putting it all in one line. I don't put it in one line. I want it to be readable. So I can say const books. Actually, let's do this. I want to call this books so it's more readable. I'm going to call this books. And then here, I'm going to call this result. So this is going to be the result, right? And I'm going to say await service.getBooks, okay? This is me having my test suite call my test services get books. All right. When it calls it, it will then call the book repository's find method. Our book repository in this service is our mock book repository. So it will call this method, which is not a real function. So it's going to look and it's going to say, hey, did you tell me to mock anything, any return values? And then it's going to be like, yes, it did. It's going to return this. Okay, so then what do we expect to come out of this? We expect that the result of this is going to equal books. All right, let's push save. And because we have watch going, this is automatically going to run. And yay. So now you can see that it calls the book find method and returns the result. All right, can anybody tell me in the chat what, if anything, else we could test about this to make sure that this is behaving the way we want it to? Okay, so Jack says that it returns in ascending order. We could, and that we could add like a whole thing, right, where but that would, okay, kind of. So we could, but that would test that we are testing that just orders things correctly and that this command works. So instead of testing TypeORM, let's test us, okay? So what we can write instead is that we expect that the mock book repository.find method has been called, okay? That's testing our code because our code calls the find method. What else can we test? We can test, and Jack, this is on your point, we can test that it's been called one time. All right. And we could test that it's been called with the correct command input. So let's go and get it. So it should be called with this. This is what should be put into the function call. All right. And so that should be returned true. So yes, we want, ultimately, if we're end-to-end testing, we want to make sure that the books come back in ascending order. However, we don't need to test TypeORM. We want to test that our code works properly. What does our code do? Our code calls the find method. We can test how many times it calls it, how many times, and what it calls it with, and that tests the same thing that I think that you're getting at. All right. GD, I don't know, tell me how to pronounce your name, but said put in a negative test. Yeah, I guess clarify a little bit more. So we could put in that we expect result to not equal something. You could also do like expect, all right, so let's add another method here. So here we use find one by, okay? So let's go to here and we'll add this find one by to our mock book repository. So here what we can do is we can say, listen, we expect that the mock book repository find one by method is not called. So that would be an example of like a negative test there. We expect that that's not called. Would I add that? Probably not, because it's like not likely to be called. But maybe if it's something like you changed your code and we used to use find one by and then it got edited to find and there was like a bug with find one by or something like that, and you want to make sure that no developer in the future uses find one by, you could add it there. So you want to really just think through what you want to test and why. But this using not is a very helpful thing to use with Jest, so I definitely do recommend it. So that's probably all that I would test in terms of the Git books. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so the next method that we have is going to be just get one book, okay? So now it's very similar, but this time we have an input, then we also have an output, and we will have one thing that we need to mock, okay? So let's go ahead and write it. So we also, as you, like, if you really think through when you start writing these, Copilot learns the pattern that you're following. So like, I just wrote like hundreds of tests for Coding with Callie's website. And it's like, by the end, I could just kind of click enter and read everything. Oh, Indra, nice to meet you, Indra. All right, so it should call the book repository find one by method. Ooh, I like that with the correct ID. That's actually a great addition, Copilot, but I'm feeling lazy, and return the results. Okay. So let's do async. All right. So now what do we want to do? We want to do inputs, outputs, and then mocks. Okay. So our inputs that we have here, and then also you can use this little button to kind of pull these aside. So I don't actually need the files anymore. So what we could do is something like this. That way you can look at both sides. All right. So our inputs for get book is going to be an ID. So we want to say const ID is equal to, and then it doesn't matter what you put, but let's say 1. All right. And then we're getting an individual book. Okay. So that's going to come out of it. So we also want to say, yeah, const book is equal to an object with an ID. That worked fine, but I want to just make it more readable in the future. So I'm going to say ID is 1, title is test book. All right. So that's going to be our output. And then we need to go over the things that we're going to mock. So we want to mock the results, the return value from this find one function. So we want to do, mock book repository.find1.mock return value book. All right, perfect. So that is going to say, hey, when this test, if find one by is called in this test, then we want it to, what's it called? We want it to return this book here in our testing module. Okay. So I like to write one statement at a time. So I'm going to then go to, now we actually need to call the function, right? So const result is equal to await service get book ID, and then we expect the result to equal book. If you write all of your assertions at the same time, it can get a little bit confusing which one is failing. So I like to do it like that. Okay, so now that we're passing, then we can add the other ones. But I actually want to show everyone something that is you might run into when you're writing a lot of tests. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to switch this method to find. All right. And I have to use it a little bit differently. I have to use the where instead. And you will understand why I'm doing this in a second. It's going to be mad, right? Because, okay. So here it's, I expected this. Oh, because we're not. All right. So, okay. This actually already kind of shows what I'm going to try to say. Okay. So here, this statement doesn't matter because we're not using find one by anymore. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And then let me just show you what's going on here. Okay. So it's going to say that this test failed, right? And you would think, all right, if you're thinking through this with me, my first thought would be like, that's weird. Why is it saying that it received an array with a book in it? Because I didn't mock my find method here. So why would it be saying that it's getting something back? Shouldn't it be getting undefined back or null back? Like, why is it getting that? I don't know if that was where your brains went either, but if they did, here's why. All of these tests intermingle, okay? So if you mock something in this test and you don't reset your mocks, then it's going to stay mocked in this test, okay? So if you're finding that you're getting things wrong, that will be it. So what if we replace the mock here? So what if we say, all right, mock book repository.find mock return value book. All right, let's see what happens here. You see that it passed, which yay. Okay, so basically this overwrote, right, this, and it's happening in a linear order. So like, cool, that works. But now what if we copy that line and we're saying, all right, well, we expect this mock book repository.find to have been called one time. Now you can see that it's failing and it's saying it expected one, bye Dan, number of calls, but it received 2 number of calls. Okay. And why is that? It's because it was called once up here and then it's called once again down here. Okay. So if we want to make sure that we're doing this properly, we need to reset our mocks after every single test. All right. And that is not that hard to do, but it's something that you need to remember to do. So we can do that in 2 ways. We have this before each here. So we could add the line here. So we could say just clear all mocks. All right. And so now if I clear my mocks after I've run my test, you can see that this is now passing. All right. Another place where you can do it is you can do after each, and then you can do the same thing. All right. You don't need them in both because if you're like calling it here or there, right? You don't need it in both, but just know that you could do one or the other. And sometimes you might want to clear something after, sometimes you might want to clear something before. So that's just so you know that you have both of those options. All right, so let's do this a little bit. We don't need find one by here. All right, Callie, gonna move on it. Okay, so it should call the book repository find method with a book ID and return the result. We have our ID, we have our resulting book. We're mocking the return value from find here. We're calling our service with the ID. We're expecting that the results to equal book. Let's add some of our other tests. So we expect find to be called. We expect find to be called one time. Are both of those necessary? No, but whatever. We're just having fun here. We expect it to be called with where ID. All right, and I think, do we need to do any other? Did we do any other tests up here? No. All right, so that would be our second test now. So we have a test written for get books. All right, the next test that we're going to do is going to be create book. All right, so you'll see here that we're using the method save. So what we can do is we can go up here. All right, and we can enter in save, and that's just going to be a just function. All right. So what are we doing now? We are creating this book, okay, here. We're awaiting the creation of the book, and then we are returning await.getBooks. All right. We're doing a lot, not really, but we're doing a lot in one test, okay? What would I do if this was a bigger application? I'd probably create a book service that the app service would call. The app service would call the book service to save the book, and then it would call the book service to get the books, right? So this logic could be separated out a little bit more. That would require some refactoring that we're not going to do, but just note that there is kind of, as your applications grow bigger and bigger, separating some logic and making sure that every method only does one thing is helpful. All right. Another thing that could be helpful is renaming this. Since it does multiple things, it might be a little bit confusing to a future reader to read create book. But really it's creating a book and then returning a list of all books. So it could be create book and return updated books. Might actually be a better name for this method. We won't worry about that right now, but that's something good to know. Okay, so we're going to say it should call the book repository save method with a book. What's in this book DTO? With a book. All right, I'm not going to type all of that out. I think that's going to be pretty obvious. And the get, where did I just go? Oh, I'm in the controller. I was like, why? This doesn't make sense. Okay. And the get books method and return the result. All right. So then let's go ahead and close that. One thing I don't like about Copilot is it never closes the things it opens until it writes all of your stuff. All right, so once again, we're doing input, output, and any mocking. So we're calling one method, so that would need to be mocked. So our input is going to be a book, and we can go ahead and let's just show that it doesn't actually matter what we're doing. So we're going to say as book DTO. So a book is just going to be an object. It doesn't actually matter what's in the book because we're not actually creating the book and testing type ORM. Okay. So then we could also say something like const books is equal to this. And then we could add the type to if we wanted, kind of up to you. Well, actually it would be more like this. Right. All right, so then we want to mock the actual return value from our method. So when we call save, we want to mock the return value. We want to return this book up here. Then now that we did that, we can actually call our service create book method and get the result back, which then will lead us to expect that the result is equal to books. Let's go ahead and save. All right. Received ID 1, test book expected this. Service.create book. So I'm being dumb. Okay. Can anybody in the chat tell me what I did wrong in this? This is actually a great example. Why is this returning to me this object instead of the array? And what was I missing? All right, so let's follow the logic. Oh, Jack, do you got something? I didn't reset. All right, so in this one, yes, it's partially that I didn't reset, but what's happening, kind of. Okay, so what's happening here is that I am mocking save, all right? But my create book doesn't actually return what save does. So to be honest, it doesn't actually matter that I'm mocking save because I'm not doing anything with what it saved. We can for readability, that's fine. What this function actually returns is it calls get books. So let's follow get books and see what happens. Well, when we do get books, we're actually calling find again. All right. So what do we need to do then? We need to mock our find method and return books. And now we're passing. All right. So it was using the find from the previous one. All right. So we need to make sure that we are mocking find, and that is we're calling books. Okay. Because to reiterate, just so this makes sense, first we call the book repository save method. Then we call the get books method. The get book method then calls the book repository find method, returns that, which then returns it to the thing. So we need to make sure we mock the book repository find method in order to make the whole thing make sense. All right. So you need to make sure you're following through the methods that you're calling in order to make sure it works too. Okay. So what do we expect? So let's change our description. So should call the book repository save and find methods with a book. I'm going to not add that part, and the get books method and return the results. All right. No, I liked the way it was before because the get books calls that, and we already tested that the get books does that. So that should be encompassing. All right. So now what else can we expect? So we expect that save was called. All right. We expect that save was called once. We expect that save was called with the book. We expect that find was called. We expect it was called once. And we expect that it was called with that. So if we save, we should run all of that and make sure. Perfect. And we pass that. So this is testing our create book. All right, let's keep going. So update book does a very similar thing. All right, we pass in input, we call a method, we call get books. All right. I'm going to try to wrap these up quickly here. So should call the book repository update method with a book ID and a book, and the get books method and return the results. Perfect. It's tempting to let Copilot write this for me, but I shall hold off. All right, so now let's do our input. So we're say const ID is equal to 1. All right. We're also sending in the book here. So let's just do a fake book as book DTO. This as, by the way, is very helpful in TypeScript, because if we didn't have this here and we just had it as an empty object and then we try to call this method with it, it would yell at us that we're not passing in a book DTO. Also, to make this better on you, it might be helpful to actually like create a fake book DTO. Let's see. Let's remind ourselves what that is in that. All right. So title, author, genre, price. Okay. So it might be better for readability to actually like be able to look at that. So you can go look at your tests down the line. I think that's totally acceptable. So const books. So maybe in this, so this is updating a book. So maybe we just have an array with book in it. You can make a second fake book if you really want multiple arrays. Sometimes I feel like though this gets like away from like actually like remembering what you're testing, right? Because we're not actually like none of this matters. We're just testing, like, is it calling the right things? Is it passing the right things in? But if this makes it more readable for you, I say go for it. All right. So then we have two things that we need to mock. The first thing that we need to mock is update. All right. You can see that we get a red squiggly line, and that's because update does not exist in our book repository. So we need to scroll up and add it. All right. Next, because we call get books and get books calls find, then we also need to mock the find method. All right, and let's see. Yep, we want, it doesn't really matter what update returns, but it returns whatever it updated. So it returns something similar to this with the ID. Could you go and make like const updated book and then do that? Yeah, and then this would be updated book. If that makes it more readable for you, I say that's fine. And then we can go ahead and say const result is equal to await service, update book ID and book. Technically, if we're doing trying to be like accurate, then this would be updated book in here. If we're trying to like semantically follow the logic. All right, so then we expect our result to be books. Let's save and run the test. Perfect. And then it's going to be pretty similar. We expect that we called update. We expect we called it once. We expect we called it with the ID in the book. Come on, Copilot. Yep. Called once with ID in book. Let's test that. And then we would find that we would do the same thing with the find method. Perfect. All right, nice. Another thing that we don't really necessarily need is like we don't need to mock the update because we're not doing anything with it. But if it helps to read it and be like, oh, this makes sense, then I think that works fine. All right. One more to test. All right, so it should call the book repository delete method with a book ID and get books method and return the results. All right. See, and now that we followed such a structure, I would guess that this is actually be pretty accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and just tab and let it do it. And then I'm going to check it. So that we get a red squiggly line to delete, and that's because we don't have delete here in our mock book repository. So we can go ahead and add it. And then you can see it passed all of the tests. Now, did I read them? No. Do I need to read them? Yes. You shouldn't just like haphazardly write a test and then go for it. Okay. So passing in a book, save, mock return value, book. That doesn't matter. Find books. That's fine. Okay. Result. Oh, see, wait. I was reading the wrong one. Okay, ID 1, books. Okay, yep. So delete returns affected 1. That's correct. Find, yep, because our get books calls find. So we're going to want to mock that to actually call it. We expect the result to be our books because that's what find returns, and get book returns just whatever find returns. We expect delete to have been called with ID, and we expect find to be called. Perfect. All right, so that is how we would write unit tests in NestJS for our service. I think where we'll start next time, so next Thursday, I think what we'll start with maybe is we could do end-to-end testing. We might refactor this a bit. Actually, yeah, let's do that. We're going to refactor this a little bit where we can add an additional service for books. So I can show you how to inject a service and how those relate to each other. But thank you all for attending. I hope this was helpful. Are there any quick questions for me before I sign off? And I'm so sorry for starting. Oh, next Thursday's Thanksgiving. Thank you, Jack. I will not be here next Thursday. So sorry. Whatever the next time we do this, I'll schedule and post to LinkedIn. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I will see you all. This Thursday, we are going to do our one of our Coding with Callie meetups about NestJS. So if you want to learn about NestJS, we're going to have a guest speaker talk about it. All right. Bye, y'all.